Please turn in your camera.
Thank you so much, sir. So, good evening to one and all
Yes, you
present
are
here,
audible. Yeah.
and we welcome you to the fourth. Is it better, sir? Is it better, sir?
Yeah, go
Sir, am
ahead,
I audible?
Utkarsh. Yes, Utkarsh, go ahead. I Yeah,
Okay, 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 sir. So, we welcome you to the fourth CMS book discussion series organized by the Department of Culture and Media Studies, Central University of Rajasthan. Today, we have with us Dr. Devnath Pathak from Department of Sociology, South Asian University, New Delhi. He is here to discuss about his book titled In Defense of the Ordinary, Everyday Awakenings, published by Bloomsbury. Before we begin, I would like to mention that this session is being recorded and the participants are requested to keep their mics off during the session. Dr. Pathak would be discussing about his work for 30 to 40 minutes, followed by the question answer session from the participants. The question answer session will be moderated by Dr. Pratik Patnaik, sir. Participants may unmute themselves and ask questions or may type their queries along with their name and institutional affiliation. Now I request Dr. Nicholas Lakra, coordinator of CMS department, to give the welcome note. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Utkarsh Gupta, for inviting me to give a welcome note. So, on behalf of the department, faculty members, and all the students, I'm here to welcome all of you for this book discussion, to have a very fruitful discussion on the new book that has come in the market. This book looks very inviting. The title is very good. In Defense of the Ordinary Everyday Awakening. Title is so nice and very inviting. Reading the title itself, feel like going to the book. And I'm very sure that there is a lot of insights in this book. So it is a very creative title and creative work of Dr. Devnath Pathak. So congratulate you, sir, for producing this very good book. And I invite you, I welcome you from the department, on behalf of department and students and participants. Participants are scholars and professors who are in the field of academy. So I invite everyone for this group discussion. First, I invited Dr. Devnath Pathak, who is from the who is assistant professor, Department of Sociology, South Asian University, New Delhi. So, sir, I would like to welcome you on behalf of our department and students and all the participants who are scholars and in the academic field. So, welcome you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Lata.
Yeah. Utkarsh,
Sir,
now we can
yes,
take ahead the
sir.
session.
Thank you, Nicholas, sir. Before we begin, I would like to request Dr. Neeru, ma'am, assistant professor, CMS department, to give an introduction of the book. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Utkarsh. Hello, everyone, and again, we are here to discuss on another book, and this time this is very genuine and unique book. Its name is In Defense of the Ordinary. I'm audible. This is a kind of book which is laced with lighter humor, soaked in serious sarcasm, and powered with poetic comics, informed by sources such as psychoanalysis, philosophy, yoga, anthropology, popular cinema, folk songs, and everything that is part of an ordinary living. It is a sociologist's sincere rumination on the layered ordinariness. The book invites us to rethink the ways of seeing, understanding, enacting, emoting, and relating with proactive ideas like why we don't value or pursuit of extraordinary is misleading us into mishaps. The key objective of the human existence is that of the book too, namely awakening the dormant potentials of emancipation every day rather than waiting for an occasional charisma induced by a holy book or a secular gimmick or an orchestrated leadership. So everyone, let's enjoy this discussion journey. So Utkarsh, over to you.
Thank you for your wise words, Neeru ma'am. Meantime, I would like to request Dr. Anup Kumar, Assistant Professor, CMS Department, to introduce our esteemed speaker to the participants. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Utkarsh. Um, Dr. Devnath Pathak, sir, he teaches sociology at South Asian University and is a founding faculty member of the university's Department of Sociology. His current research interests include popular culture like music, cinema, and performance, and South Asian studies. He is reviews editor of the Society and Culture in South Asia, the Journal of the Department of Sociology, South Asian University, co-published with Sage India. Some of his recent publications include Living and Dying, Meanings in Mathili Folklore, 2018, another South Asia, 2018, Culture and Politics in South Asia, Performative Communication, co-edited 2018, Sociology and Social Anthropology in South Asia, Histories and Practices, co-edited in 2018. Thank you very much. Over to you, Utkarsh.
Thank you so much, Anup sir. So, without any further delay, I would like to invite our speaker for today's session. Over to you, Devnath sir.
Thank you, Utkarsh. Thank you all, colleagues, students, friends. This is wonderful to be here and to be talking about. The book gives a pretext to talk about certain concerns which one has been grappling with for a while. One major concern, I think, given the location where we are discussing it, is about the kind of the way we decide to discuss matters, like the logic of area of interest, the thematic areas, the strict compartmentalization in social sciences and in cognate disciplines of social sciences. I mean, this is unusual probably because the department is committed to study media and culture and all those things. And then one is discussing ordinary. One may have this kind of question whether it is suitable for discussion in, is this right place to discuss it? But that's where the struggle that this book represents begins. So this has been for a while that I have been struggling, and I'm sure this is not my struggle alone. A lot of colleagues of my time would probably share some part of this struggle. This is about taking note of basically some of those major concerns and then trying to figure out where could be the core of this concern. I mean, there is a maze of concerns. If you are using fancy vocabulary, maze of problematics. And then one is trying to figure out whether there could be some kind of core of this, this maze, or one has to operate with this bewildering variety of, issues, or one has to find some kind of, connecting thread. And to my mind, for a while, it's been the idea of ordinary. Certainly, it need not be only this idea. There could be someone can come up with some other kind of core, some other kind of connecting thread, which would be some other idea, that would be equally fair. Given my location and engagement for last decade, 1 decade, I thought that probably one can try to develop a sense that it is this idea of ordinary which happens to be some kind of core, and from there it provides a kind of vantage point from where one can deal with this bewildering variety of problematics one has come across. So if I have to put it in one line, it's a Zen act of a troubled academics who would find it very difficult to dissociate personal from professional. A lot of problem arises the moment we are, someone like me, fails to dissociate personal and political. Even though we have learned from a lot of wise people, particularly from professional peers, that one should try to put aside personal while discharging professional responsibilities, and yet one finds it very difficult to do it, and there is some kind of intellectual support for not doing it. We are familiar with that intellectual support from the literature of social sciences, and one operationalizes a perspective, a way of seeing that merges personal and professional, and then all sorts of implications happen. One of the implications is that one begins to face struggle of a very different kind. It becomes very unsettling for the status quo. If it all appears very abstract, one can get into the empirics of experiences. So throughout the book, this is emphasized that the empirics need not come from somewhere else. It is from very experiences of anybody who is trying to reason. Need not be in that formal mindset of doing a research or visiting a field. Those are equally important, and we have been doing that. But then just resorting to the idea of reasoning, and when I say reasoning, I tend to qualify it by suggesting that this is a reasoning with reason where R is in lower case, not in uppercase. Reason with R in uppercase has amounted to all sorts of generalization, all sorts of conclusive arguments. Here the idea is to stay inconclusive and instead go through the details of experiences, which would not have only one line of argument. It will have, from our experiences itself, we come across a variety of counter arguments, putting them together, trying to represent them through variety of pronouns, even though it amounts to certain kind of grammatical hazard, because every time you use a pronoun, you're supposed to have used before pronoun some kind of noun, and avoiding usage of noun, instead going straight away to operate with the pronoun, is something very common across this book, with the purpose that there is supposed to be, we already indulge in politics of pronoun in our day-to-day life. We already talk about ourselves in terms of, we, they, I, you. Earlier it was we versus they in that debate on who is the self, who is the other. But then post-colonial societies saw that it's not that bipolar usage of pronoun that can characterize our discourses. Instead, it's various kind of pronouns which come together at times, making it difficult for us to decide whether I, the pronoun I, could be a sufficient representation for a self, or there is equally valid representation in a pronoun they for the self, even though it appears like counterintuitive, so and so forth. So this book, I must, it's a kind of disclaimer. If not, if humility appears too humble a word, it's a kind of disclaimer that probably hard-nosed academic may not find anything worth smelling in this book. One has to really exercise nose and make it a little milder to smell anything useful over here. Why? Because it does not undertake the conceptual apparatus available, all kind of conceptual routes available to arrive at the idea of ordinary, which has been concerned elsewhere in other discussions as well. Why not some of those very well-known philosophers? Why not some of those very well-known sociological, methodological, theoretical discussions, which give us plenty of thoughts on everydayness, ordinary experiences, so on and so forth? Why straight away going into the details of experiential empirics? Why not provide some kind of theoretical trajectory, some kind of outline which will help everybody understand as to how to provide definitional features of the ordinary? And that's where you can say there is modesty. You can say somebody read some kind of rebellion in it, that it does not get into any kind of attempt to define the ordinary. Why? For a simple reason. As I said, personal and professional are not dissociated either here or elsewhere in the author's life. So here too, there is no attempt to define, precisely because no final definition works. Defining would also mean putting it in some kind of fixed categories, and we see that our experiences disturb those categories. Our experiences at times would reaffirm certain kind of categories, but then there is also a great deal of possibility in the domain of experiences in everyday life that those very strong definitional features will be subverted. And if we allow those subversions to happen in our everyday life, it gets really difficult to say that that was ordinary and this is not ordinary. It's very difficult to really get into the business of distinguishing ordinary from extraordinary, particularly the kind of everyday life that we have been leading. These things are not too strongly separated. For intellectual convenience, I may try to put that these are the features of ordinary and these are features of extraordinary. This is from everyday life moments, and these are some of the critical events, some of the spectacular events, so on and so forth. But then we find that the spectacular, critical events, very mundane, banal, very non-significant, inglorious, very simpleton, all these things come together. Things which may appear very disgusting to our politically sensitive mind, and some of those things which we idealize with our political consciousness, all those things start merging. They look like coming together. And it is in that situation, even though society may be polarized along political lines, but we find that if we take account of the way everyday life is led, that polarity itself is challenged. It is another puzzle as to how that polarity is sustained in spite of the everydayness which challenges that polarity. Probably there is some other kind of appended industries which are in the business of eclipsing the image of everyday life, and instead of that image of everyday life, it tries to manufacture and present to us some other image of everyday life where things are presented in polar oppositions. So that's what the book tries to do. It tries to show that if you want to really understand what ordinary means, instead of getting to strict definitional features, we need to take the route of messy, embodied experiences, about which a lot of philosophers, a lot of social thinkers have talked elsewhere, right? But one will not always resort to those thinkers and philosophers. One need to know about them, but one need not always resort to refer to them, make technical citations of their work in order to make sense of the empirics of experiences. These empirics of experiences from cultural history, which would allude to past, from our present time, from all kind of deliberations on utopias, on social thoughts in the sense that, in the sense, if I have to use a reference, in the sense in which someone like Max Horkheimer, while delivering the directorial speech at the foundation of Frankfurt School, tried to distinguish social thoughts from the way modules of some kind of modular imagination of theorizing. He was trying to challenge by using the idea of social thought, social philosophy. So if one looks at the details of experiences itself without dissociating professional and personal, one gets a sense that yes, there are certain features of the ordinary, even though one cannot really put down some of those features as with sense of finitude, with sense of conclusiveness, that yes, these are the definitional features. One key feature, even if not definitional, one key feature that appears from the discussion in these 200 some pages is that perhaps in very provisional sense, in the sense in which someone like Alice will walk across the wonderland, in that sense, it seems that perhaps the domain of ordinary is some kind of dynamic orbit which keeps moving along with us. And in its dynamic movement, it tries to put certain part of ordinary itself as extraordinary. And the moment if you're moving along that ordinary of that orbit of ordinary, and you arrive at what you perceived or what everybody helped you perceive as extraordinary, the moment you arrive at that extraordinary, you begin to realize that it is no longer extraordinary. It has been always part of your everyday experience itself. And then you begin to look for something else which can be put as extraordinary. And hence you realize that this idea that extraordinary and ordinary are counter opposite, this idea too is some kind of manufactured notion within the realm of ordinary. You are told by senior peers, your industry, your state, institutions which govern this ordinary, institutions of patriarchy, caste, within which you have all kind of division of labor, all kind of hierarchy. We accept it, sometimes we refuse to accept it, sometimes we revolt against it. We take different kind of dispositions toward them. But we realize that all these things have been telling us, will keep informing us that, you have to come out of the realm of ordinary to achieve something extraordinary, to achieve some kind of ennobled position, to achieve some kind of position which is away, which is distinguishable from the mundane. And yet you realize, because you're not very servile, you're a very active agent, you realize after achieving, after accomplishing, you realize that this too is nothing more than yet another facet of the ordinary life. The ordinary life that we lead, where we are every now and then told that this is something you have to depart from, you have to get away from, you have to get rid of. Actually, that continues along with you, and you realize that even after making various kind of achievements, having horizontal, vertical mobility, even after that, this ordinariness does not disappear. So there is a sense of essentialization that takes place here, that ordinary never disappears, that that banality never disappears, that in spite of all kind of attempts, Sisyphus never reaches with the boulder on his or her back, never reaches the goalpost uphill, keeps rolling back down. And there, likewise, metaphorically speaking, if Sisyphus met his metaphor here, so likewise, ordinary never disappears, in spite of all the attempt, in spite of all the accomplishments here and there. So if it does not disappear, what all within it we should try to recognize, in addition to a great deal of attempts made by other social scientists, which helped us recognize various kind of institutions and how those institutions operate upon us, the binding factors of those institutions, coercive, violent manifestations of those, the practices related to those institutions, and some of those institutions I just named. If you want to include, many of the institutions are they look like forces coming from outside, but they are very much well within our everyday life. For example, one can probably understand if one looks at just the example of WhatsApp or Facebook, some of these kind of places. They are no longer just a thing from outside. They have become so integrated to everyday life that everything, good, bad, ugly, circulated through them, look like very much integrated part of our everyday life. And therefore it becomes possible for them to brainwash us, mobilize us, push us, persuade us, convince us, even if we do not mobilize in the street by just pressing one button, forward button, we become part of the whole cycle, so and so forth. So some of those things those forces may be outside. A lot of them are very, very well within the domain of ordinary. Even those which seem to be outsider, which seem to be outside forces, they have become integrated part of our everyday life. And in that kind of regime of experience, we begin to see the necessity to take note of the sensorial details, the details which affect us, the
Yes, sir.
affective details.
We can.
Sorry, are you trying to say something to me? So I heard something. Are you trying to say something, Pranta, to me?
No, by mistake, I think the
Okay.
mic turned on.
All right. Right. So yeah. So if this is the case, probably it's necessary for us to take note of the sensorial details. Here, one is informed by various kind of attempts lately in social sciences, which have tried to. I mean, we have heard of this kind of terms: affective turn, visual turn, sensorial turn. Instead of giving into any individual turn, fancy turn, the idea is simply to put together, recognize what kind of sensorial affective details are available in our experiences of the ordinary. And those affects, those sensorial affects, are put together in terms of ideas. I mean, in terms of cognized consequence vis-a-vis ideas, and various pronouns representing variety of people, inviting readers self as well represented through those pronouns, are basically to take note of some of those sensorial details, which remind us, as I said right in the beginning, it's a Zen act, which remind us of the basic lesson that if we can't transform the world radically, if we really cannot transform in very consequential manner, at least what we can do to begin with is to recognize all the details which are gripping, which have arrested us to a great extent. And probably the very basic act, the baby step is this. And by taking those steps, this book is trying to put together some of those details. This is not only with regard to, as I said, the cognized consequences. It's also about on the pretext of doing this, it's also about putting trying to see as to what really happened to the portrait of Dorian Gray, Oscar Wilde's portrait of Dorian Gray, trying to see exactly what happened to the self of the author himself in this case, or trying to see as to what has happened with the selves of various readers, if there are any readers. What kind of changes happened to the portrait of Dorian Gray when Dorian Gray was almost, had this blessing in or curse in disguise. He went around doing all sorts of things which did not affect his real face, but then it was affecting his portrait. So here the idea is to unearth that portrait and try to see as to what has really happened to. This is the last bit, and then I will stop. This is easier said than done, because the domain, as I said, it's an embodied, messy embodied experiential domain, which will be slippery. Slippery in the sense that one does not know what side one is going to take. So there is, on occasions, one can feel that, there is a urge to take a side, take a position, resort to the finality of a perspective. But then there is also an attempt to leave the drama loosely tangled, which means let other sides also come into picture, because those other sides are also interjecting our ordinary life. We are, it really becomes difficult to say that I am only this in my day-to-day life. I am only, I can be characterized by this or that level in my day-to-day life. Intellectually, one can be characterized. Intellectually, one can be labeled easily, and therefore it has become easier for state to operationalize the level of urban Naxal. And likewise, in various other regimes, there have been other kind of labels. But then the moment a writer, an academic, a teacher, or someone who is performing the role of a father, of a husband, of a friend, of an enemy, and so on and so forth, the moment we recognize that these roles have greater component of very ordinary everyday thing, that moment it gets difficult to really operate with one level, one particular classificatory level, one particular identification. So nobody can deny that those identification marks which have emerged historically will continue to haunt us. Nobody can deny that, eventually in official papers, one would be recognized with these kind of markers. And if we do not provide these markers, and we try to, suggest that, I value, or one values some kind of fuzziness, but then official documents would reduce that fuzziness, would minimize that fuzziness, and would reduce you into the markers. So these are the challenges while thinking through the experiential empirics of the ordinary. It's slippery domain, and at times it appears very politically incorrect and disturbing to take note of the fact that one has the camel sat on the wrong side. One recognizes that the camel sat on the wrong side. Just like in this book, in the very beginning, there is this recognition that with Mullah Nasruddin, one of the eccentric thinkers of cultural history, from cultural history, Mullah Nasruddin, and with that I will end. Mullah Nasruddin once was riding his donkey, sitting facing backward, sitting on the donkey facing backward, and his donkey was rushing past the marketplace. Someone from the marketplace called out for Mullah, and Mullah said, "Don't you see, I'm very busy, I'm looking for my donkey." So recognizing the fact that one has been sitting wrong way, and one has been on this high pace mobility for a variety of reasons, be it the regime of power or regime of UGC, API system, which reduces the vocation of teaching into certain kind of mathematically calculative numbers, whatever be the reason. But recognizing the fact that this way we have been moving along this way, and then trying to figure out as to what kind of ordinariness unfolded in that spree of activity, that is That is the objective here. Lastly, it may seem that this is for some kind of personal catharsis, and personal catharsis or public catharsis, because this is a season of festivity. Probably everybody thinks of catharsis, but we also know that no catharsis has longer shelf life. Catharsis gets over very soon, and after it gets over, it acquires all kind of institutional ideological face which we may not like, and that possibility always exists even with the reasoning that we are trying to do with the idea of ordinary. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dave, for that thought-provoking session. And I believe those who have gone through the book or maybe have got some insights from Dave's talk would be thinking more in terms of ordinariness. And as Dave started his talk by saying that where does he fit into the Department of Culture and Media Studies? So I was just reminded of Raymond Williams' article, Culture is Ordinary. So we also have this reading by Raymond Williams, Culture is Ordinary, and where we talk about the ordinariness of life, and even Stuart Hall's encoding decoding model, where he emphasizes on the ordinariness of the audiences while in the decoding process. So the session is open for any kind of comments, questions. People, you can unmute yourself, or you may raise your hands, or you may put your questions in the chat box. Uh, I think before somebody else begin, let me take this opportunity to say a few things about this book. Like while I was reading this book, uh, like at one go, I completed 7 chapters, and it was like so much like I could connect to with this book, and we could look into what constitutes that ordinariness, where you talk about ordinariness as a complex structure. And as you mentioned that we did not have to define or what is ordinary, rather I think we should have a lived experience of this ordinariness, and that is where catches the entire attention in this book of how there is a spectacle of extraordinary. And I think when we are talking about ourselves, we refer to the other, and in that way, when we're talking about ordinariness, we also indirectly refer to the extraordinariness. And somewhere in between, I also feel that the ordinary also creates a spectacle of extraordinary, or somewhere the ordinariness itself is the extraordinary. So these two categories, there is a kind of a blurring when we are talking about our own experiences, and then it then brings us to this question of like whose ordinariness, and like whether it is the authors or whether it is the reader's ordinariness. So that is one question. Like how do you, it's not a question, it's just a kind of no observation, like how you deal with that. And you also mentioned about talking about reasoning, how reasoning is so much of essential for awakening. That is where everyday awakening comes from. And but you also has have also very nicely pointed out like this reasoning is something which we are unable to have because of our conditioning. Okay, so we are socially conditioned, and that is why this critical reasoning does not take place. So uh, one thing I think most of the participants would also like to understand, like how to overcome then such kind of conditionings that prevent this critical reasoning. Okay, does it then have something to do with the location of the author or location of the reader? Okay, so your position and the position of a reader, I'm reminded of my field work on sexuality, where people who identified themselves as LGBTQ, how some of them were very much comfortable in like coming out, but coming out itself, the term is not that very easy for many, most of the people. So it has to do a lot with where we are positioned and how we overcome this conditioning and have this critical reasoning. Yeah, so these are the 2 points that I wanted to make. Maybe out of the 7 chapters, maybe the remaining of the chapters would have been answering to these questions, but for the time being, this is what I felt of asking. Yeah, over to you,
No,
Dev.
no, the remaining chapters would not answer these questions.
Okay.
That is another thing which when I was finalizing the book, in the original form, this book had no references. My publisher was the contact person, the editors at Bloomsbury. They were in love with the book, but they were also very confused and very uncomfortable. And they requested me several times, and then finally I gave in. They said, why don't you add, as an afterthought, why don't you add some references? So I added some endnotes, making it very clear in my preface and introduction as well that those endnotes are not to be taken seriously. They're only for my own pleasure. Again, I added, saying that what, let me show off that I know some of the sources. But then even that is incomplete. I would have shown off some better sources which would have established the academic merit of the book. But probably I was never writing it for academic public to begin with. It became of that kind. Very valid question, and this question is not answered anywhere in the book. Uh, Again, as part of the conscious design I had of the book, I had thought that let there be a book of questions. Why should every book answer all kind of questions? Let there be a book which leaves a reader helplessly with the questions. I mean, in that regard, one can say it has somebody elsewhere. Somebody said that it has. I don't know really, but one of the readers pointed out that it has some kind of Richard Rorty effect, which I did not know. Readers are saying all sorts of things, so I thought it's a good compliment. But I didn't intend to have any Richard Rorty effect. I simply wanted to have a book where there are plenty of questions which can emerge, and let the readers figure it out. As you rightly said, Pranta, the idea was that anybody who really gives a reading, even some part of the book, should feel that it is not only this author's rumination or reasoning, whichever term you use. Any reader should also feel that this is also I can identify it. It is something which I have also gone through. And in that regard, right in the beginning of the book, there is little bit of discussion on who is the author, and that's where there are certain kind of, not citation but references to some of the notorious names, Roland Barthes, Michel Foucault, and others. But then the idea was to help anybody read these, all these, details in every chapter, and feel that some of those details are also related to them. I would not be surprised that if at any point of time any reader, any student comes and tells me that, what, without acknowledging, you have plagiarized my experiences, and I would take that accusation very happily. Yes, it tries to put together a broader spectrum of empirics, experiential empirics. Now, I totally agree with this point that it may be a locational privilege of the author. But then, and I'm like you, I have been, all of us have read our sociology, our bit of sociology, more or less same time. Some of us have gone to the same places. Saroj is here, you are here, our classmate and very senior fellow, Professor Vyas Maharana is here. And we have been aware of this question, who's ordinary? Likewise, elsewhere we asked who's modernity, who's tradition. Likewise, one can ask, and it's a very valid question, whose ordinary is this being presented here? And one can pinpoint the locational privilege of the author, in spite of the fact that author, as I'm telling you, has tried to very consciously play with this politics of pronouns, number one. Number two, the broader spectrum, even though I wanted to take a side, and it seemed that I will slip into that mode of talking, and at times it appears very judgmental, and therefore very sharp polemics will come across. One would come across sharp polemics. In spite of that, some of the other what is elsewhere considered to be counterintuitive ideas which may appear different from what is being supported, they are also brought in, not brought in as some kind of craft work. They're brought in because they also appear simultaneously, or more or less something will appear first and something immediately after that. They appear in our day-to-day experiences, things which are not very palatable to us, and things which are very palatable to us, they might be so closely related in terms of their appearance that it really gets difficult. So by saying all those things, I was trying to basically address this concern. If not answer this entirely, I was trying to put an exclamation mark. Is it really locational privilege of the author alone that is being represented here? Right? So there is no answer to this question at the moment, but then there is some kind of exclamatory flagging that yes, this question arises, and probably because of this question in mind, there is this conscious attempt every now and then to remind the reader that that others are also present. Others are not separable from the self of the narrator in this book. Narrator is not. It seems that narrator is the author, but the very fact that the idea of authorship, who is the author, was already problematized in the beginning, and it was suggested that the author is never alone. Author is not dead, but author is not alone either. Author is not independent self either. So, for example, another example is of the fact that author is not alone is also reflected in the fact that throughout the book, there is conscious attempt to sanitize it. It was not because the book was readied, prepared, produced during the time of pandemic. The sanitizing is also because over the years, we have become a little too vulnerable to all kind of provocations. Anybody who studies communication or cultural communication would understand that it's a great challenge these days to rescue an act of any speech act these days, rescue speech act from our very thin skin that we have developed. We can't take any joke so easily these days. So there is one chapter, for example, where there's certain kind of reasoning with the practice, kinship practice of some time, in which we employed abusive words, galis, right? But then we also realized those galis have acquired different other kind of notions. They have been going through changes. The gali which may appear some kind of pleasurable item to some people would be very offensive to the other. So we have also developed some kind of sensibility toward it. We don't want to offend the other. As a result, we are also compromising on our corpus of galis. Likewise, we are compromising on our corpus of humor, so on and so forth. We are exploring the possibility of developing certain kind of politically correct humor. We are successful, partially failure in that regard. All those things keep coming up precisely because there is this sense that at the end of the day, probably it would be all considered a reasoning from reasoning of an author with certain kind of locational privilege. Secondly, and last thing, Pranta, in order to address your question, is that isn't it a little too much to think that ordinarily people are not capable of critical reasoning? All kind of critical reasonings may happen. It may not be critical reasoning only in the format that is dear to us, that is familiar to us through variety of social science discourses. It may be some other kind of critical reasoning, and hence, because there is some kind of critical reasoning available elsewhere as well, and hence there is always a possibility that things might change at any point of time. I understand that momentarily we give into pessimism. We are very saddened by certain kind of cases that we come across, the incidents of gruesome nature that really saddens and frustrates us, and we feel helpless, and we tend to give up on those occasions. But then we also come across, in the same sphere of experience, we also come across fractions of critical thinking, and that makes us hopeful. The point is whether we are able to recognize those other varieties of critical thinking. That's why in the very beginning of the book, there is slight bit of reference to locaetic. Uh, if one wants to use the word methodology, one can. Otherwise, it's not to. The, the discussion does not use the word methodology. Instead, it uses ways of seeing. So, in locaetic ways of seeing, it was not like a solid conceptual apparatus that was presented. It was simply called, some Buddhist scholars looking at the locaetic practices. A Buddhist scholar like Ashwagosha said that they are simply into Vitandavad. Vitandavad is a plain, simple contestation. And there are all cultural equivalent of the practice of Vitandavad. You go to Bengal, you find Addabazi. You go to other parts of South Asia, you will have some or other equivalent where people come together and they, in a very personalized manner, they contest each other. It's not like, oh, no, this is an intellectual contestation and therefore let's not get personal. That happens, that is said on television screen very often, let's not get personal. Or in the seminar hall, we felt that, sanitizing effect, self-censorship, let's not get personal. So here, the book, because it's resuscitating the art of polemics, is getting personal. To begin with the personal of the author himself, and then simultaneously it invokes the personal of the readers, anybody, the personal of the critique, and thereby it tries to suggest that it's a very ordinary practice. Vitandavad is not a sophisticated practice of chosen few. Vitandavad is done by any Tom, Dick, and Harry. Anybody can stand anywhere and start saying that this is all rubbish. If you can remember, this is the last thing. It's such a wonderful question you have asked. So if you can remember, we had this Kavi Vidrohi in JNU who passed away, and he was a perfect example of Vitandavad. He had given up on the institutional mechanism of higher education, and still he hung out in the campus. He was poetic, and one famous line that he used to say every now and then to attack us if we cared to decipher his lines. Otherwise, it was too rumbled, and therefore many of people would not get those lines, even though he uttered them very frequently. He used to say in Hindi, "Din bhar padhna, रात भर लिखना, जीवन है या है ये कोई परियोजना." Whether it is life or some kind of great planning. It was also critique of Nehruvian idea of planning, that very small couplet, but it will have so many things condensed in it. Now that is the example of Vitandavad. You need not have, you may have sacrificed your institutional privilege, locational privilege, and yet you may continue doing precisely those things which some of us feel we do in the hallowed position as an academic. That's what I thought I should say in order to engage with your question.
Yeah, thank you, Dev. And very glad that you brought out this personal is political. Yeah, and you mentioned also, and how we teach in research methodology that your research has to be objective, and the book is talking about recognizing the subjectivities of the researcher, and that is how it is a good academic book. I don't know why you are saying it's non-academic. It is a non-academic book, but it addresses the question of academics. Yeah, I think others may also get a chance to interact with you. If you have any queries, please ask. Okay, I think there are no questions. People might have understood the importance of ordinariness. Utkarsh, are you there? Okay. Vyasa, is there any question for Dev or any comment you want to add? Okay, Utkarsh has joined. Fine. Okay, so I think since people don't have any questions, we can wind up the session. Over to you, Utkarsh.
Yes, sir. I think there are no more questions. So now I would like to call upon Dr. Anup Kumar, Assistant Professor, CMS Department, to deliver the vote of thanks. Over to you, Anup, sir.
Thank you very much, Utkarsh. Uh, okay, so thank you, Dr. Devnath Pathak, sir. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and talking about your book. It was very interesting and enlightening to listen to you. Thank you very much, sir. And thanks to all the faculties from other institutions who have joined and who are motivating us, and like we are continuing, and we have lot many book discussion in the time to come. And at last, thanks all the students from our department and from other institutions who have joined the book discussion program here. Thank you all once again. Over to you, Utkarsh.
Yeah,
I think
I
that
think
I think
thank you, Utkarsh, for a wonderful moderator in this session. Okay,
thank you, sir, for
okay,
opportunity. Thank you, sir.
okay. Bye, everybody.
I,
We
I
will.
once again thank you all, colleagues, friends, students, for taking interest in this discussion on this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Dev. And happy Diwali to all. We will be meeting next on 12th of November for another book discussion by Vinod Pavrala and Kanchan Malik on community radio. So happy and safe Diwali to all. Bye, Dev.
Bye
Bye,
bye.
everybody.